Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It's the summer solstice today. Happy summer solstice. I hope you're all having a good one. And I'm going to talk about the astrology of the summer solstice today, give you a few things to think about, some ancient wisdom about the summer solstice, about the sign of Cancer. I'm going to talk a little bit about the upcoming eclipses next month. So a lot to cover, but I'm going to try to do it in a short time so I don't take up too much of your afternoon today. All right, so a few things that I want to do. First of all, I just want to give you a picture, really kind of a fun picture, an astronomical picture of the summer solstice. So if you've never seen what the summer solstice looks like in the sky before, I'm going to show you. So here's a picture of, this is an astronomy program that I use. It's really great. And basically what you're seeing right now in the sky in this picture, I've of course made it dark outside so that if the sun was normally out like this in the sky, it would be bright, but I've darkened it so that you can get a sense of what this looks like, as if you could see all the stars in the background and things like that. But here's what the summer solstice looks like. It is the sun at high noon, right on June 21st, where I live here, which is right around Baltimore. The sun is at its highest point in the sky, which gives it also the highest arc. See, that green line is the ecliptic line. So when we follow that green line across the sky and the sun has to, kind of go that big high distance, it takes it a really long time. So it's the longest day of the year. So that's kind of fun just to get a sense of that. Now, when the sun crosses this line that you can see down here, this red line, that's the celestial equator, which is a projection of the Earth's equator out into space. When the sun moves across that line going upward towards the north, it's the spring equinox. When it's at that point, there's an equal amount of light and dark in the 24-hour period. Everything from this line upward to the top and then all the way back down to that line again is considered the yang half of the year. Just call it Y for yang. Actually, yin is with a Y too, isn't it? So I'll just write it out. So that's like the yang half of the year. Okay, so the sun will go from this midway line all the way up to the top of the sky. When it reaches that, that's the Tropic of Cancer. It's like 23.5 degrees north of the celestial equator, and it reaches that place. And then from that point forward, the sun will start descending and going downward. And then as it goes downward, it will eventually cross that celestial equator again, which is going to be our fall equinox. This is because the light of the sun is literally falling. And it will then, when it crosses that line, it's then going to go all the way down to like 23.5 Capricorn, which will take it, the sun down here somewhere. And then once we get down there, we're at the winter solstice. And so everything that happens on this half of the year, from the sun going down to the bottom and then back up to that midway point again, this would be the yin half of the year. That is the dark side of the year, where there's more darkness in a 24-hour period than there is light. So right now, when we've gone from the spring equinox all the way up to the top, we are on the ascending half of the yang portion of the year, which is the yang of the yang. It's the lightest half of the year. It's the most quintessentially yang-like, outward, energetic, expansive, light, ethereal. Now, and that's spring. We're coming down. We're still in the light half of the year, but we're coming down. This is the yin of the yang, and it starts with Cancer, whereas the yang of the yang at the spring equinox starts with Aries, a fire sign. Now we start with Cancer, a water sign. We're going into the yin of the yang. Again, it's still light, but the sun is now descending in the sky. It just kind of gives you a picture for what we're dealing with at the summer solstice, which I think is kind of cool to see. Now, the sign that occupies this position, this entryway, this turning point is Cancer. It's kind of interesting to note that Cancer, the crab, kind of scuttles sideways. Have you ever noticed that? Crabs go sideways, and they often will go sideways and then they go backward before they go forward again. So some have speculated that that the crab might have been associated with this portion of the sky seasonally, because look at what the sun does, right? It's I'm just going to turn this a little bit so that you can see. Right up at the top of the sky, somewhere up here is the North Star, right? So in a sense, the yang of the yang half of the year, the sun's ascending in the sky, and it's going back towards the pole star, this other kind of sun in the sky, an unchanging light that the sun itself is moving towards and away from all year long. Now, when it reaches this topmost point closest to the North Star, the yang of the yang, the light of the light, then it starts descending and it will start going backwards. So if we just do this one day at a time, excuse me, you can see the sun is going to start to come down in the sky one day at a time. See how that's going down, 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 down. So that turnaround point is a point where the sun appears to start moving backward. And so this forward movement, pause, and then a backward movement, that movement is associated with the crab of Cancer, which is a backward moving, kind of sideways moving creature. That's just a, kind of an interesting association between the animal, the constellation, and the actual astronomical phenomenon. So I'm not going to labor any of the astronomy anymore. I just wanted to give you a little sense for what that's all about. Now, this gateway is also incredibly important, and I'm going to now put up the chart on the screen so that you can see it, because it's 0 Cancer, it's a cardinal degree. You can see the sun right here at 29:58 Gemini as I'm talking. It's about to head into Cancer, and that will create the summer solstice. So that's where we're at, when you're talking about the astronomy of the moment and the kind of astrology of the moment. Sun about to enter Cancer, summer solstice, it's a big moment. It's a big turning point. But what does this moment really symbolize, and what does it mean for us? How can we interpret it, and how does it pertain to our everyday lives right now? So that's what we're going to try to do next. So let's talk about this. Some of the most important things that you need to know. Again, let's just repeat the obvious. When the sun reaches this point, it starts a turnaround. It starts to move into the yin of the yang. You have to think about this in terms of what the light is doing during the spring, which is ascending all the way upwards toward the North Star. And the North Star represents something like heaven, spirit, eternity, divinity, that which does not change, that which is permanent and absolute, God, whatever you want to call it. So the sun is moving upward toward that light. And then it reaches that light and then turns and starts falling down. Now, it's still going to be more light than darkness, but it starts descending. Now, this was considered like a cosmic gateway that began the process of light descending into matter, or spirit or soul descending into a body or a form. For example, ancient astrologers associated the sign of the crab, Cancer, with the birth of the cosmos itself, the birth of the material universe. This was depicted in a famous ancient teaching chart called the Thema Mundi. Also had the chart of the birth of the cosmos, and Cancer is rising. And the rising sign, of course, is the sign that denotes birth. So the quintessential sign that belongs to the first house, you might say, by the way, as an aside, is really Cancer. In modern astrology, sometimes we associate the 12 signs in order with the 1st through 12th houses, and it's really not how ancient astrologers did things. Now, Cancer's opposite sign, Capricorn, remember we have eclipses coming up in Cancer and Capricorn. That's where the nodes of the moon are right now as well. Capricorn's ruled by Saturn, who is associated with the death of the body, and the gateway of the winter solstice, which is associated with the departure of the soul from the body back through the spirit into the spiritual world. Interestingly, Capricorn winter solstice is going to be the yang of the yin. So you think about it from Libra all the way down to Capricorn, it's the descent. It's just yin of yin, descent, descent, descent down to the darkest time. When you get to Capricorn, it's still the dark half of the year all the way up until Aries when we reach the spring equinox. But now the light is rising again, so it's the yang of the yin. So in Cancer, we have the yin of the yang, and in Capricorn, we have the yang of the yin. And those are really deep, like interesting esoteric subjects to think about. But what they basically meant is that in Cancer, we have the beginning of the descent of spirit into matter, or the descent of light into the world. Whereas in Capricorn, we have the exiting of light from the material world out of the body. And so those are, the sort of spiritual principles that were associated with these signs. Now, again, just like crabs sort of scuttle sideways, we also see the sun turning at this point and going back downward, whereas we have the mountain goat emerging out of the water and leaving the water, climbing the mountain. That's the sea goat, and that's basically the image of leaving the material universe, which is conceptualized as a descent into water and then exiting water. So the etymological root for the word crab in Greek, by the way, also relates to the idea of scratching, drawing, or writing. And of course, in many different ancient traditions, the descent of spirit into matter was not just about souls coming into being, but it was also about heavenly knowledge descending into creation. For example, in the Vedas, the sonic mantras and teachings of the Vedas, or whether you have the sort of dreamtime music of the Aborigines, or many different traditions and cultures around the world have depicted not just the descent of spirit into matter, but also of heavenly teachings down into the world. The word crab also associated the idea of scratching, drawing, and writing, the descent of spiritual knowledge into material form, such as teachings, mantras, mathematics, numbers, glyphs, graphs. Glyph, graph, many of those words also pictograph, iconography, graphy, that part of it has a relationship to the etymological roots of the word crab, which is very interesting. And you can look some of this up online. I did a bunch of research on this online. It was pretty fascinating. Some also say that the claw marks of the crab, as seen in the sand, are sort of the writing of the gods, and that the claws represent nature's pencils, nature's pens. So not surprisingly, the ruling planet of Cancer was the moon. And the moon is related to, for example, Hermes Thoth, who was a scribal god of the Egyptians, a semi-divine, also semi-divine legendary founder of astrology. If you haven't checked out my 10-part series on the Hermetica, check that out. That was a really fun series all devoted to Hermes. So Hermes is a sacred translator, scribe, teacher of heavenly knowledge, and he was a moon goddess, or a moon god, or both. So the moon is, of course, a reflective light that carries, in a sense, the original light. It's reflective of the original light. So similarly, the moon is natural, for example, naturally, the planetary takes its joy in the third house, which is associated with writing. The moon is a reflective light, carries the knowledge of the original. That's why the moon is also associated with scribes, writers, singers, poets, anything where you're trying to remember or recall something, nostalgia, romance, beauty, recollection of things past, the ancestors, all of those things that feature remembrance. And scribes, of course, have to remember what's been said. Many of these things were, of course, orally received. And then the function of the scribe, even before they were writing things down, was to remember. So the moon has this connection, and Cancer has this connection, not only to the descent of spirit into matter, but also of all of the sacred remembrance that we need of heavenly knowledge, whether that's through writing or math or music or poetry or whatever, the scribe, the rememberer. Now, one of the main archetypal callings of those who are born under the sign of the crab, or if you have prominently placed planets in the crab, or the crab is rising, or the crab is at the midheaven, is thus to remember. Memory works in a lot of different ways, but some of them are very predictable with Cancer, right? We have memory of nation and state. It was a big institution in the world that we commit a lot of ourselves to remembering, to being devoted to the flag, the state, to remember those who died, to remember those who serve, or to family. to remember our ancestors, to remember our family bonds, to serve those we share with, our homeland, our home state, our hometown, our home team, or one community or another, my friends, my tribe, my people. All of these are also about remembrance. And remembrance gives us a sense of our connection to source. Remember that at the gateway of Cancer, light is descending into matter. And so the potential is also for us, once we're in a body, we've come a long ways, we've traveled a long ways. And so there is some sense of needing to remember where we've come from. And so the feature of Cancer and memory necessarily implies a separation between source and wherever we are currently at, whatever we're currently doing. Just like we come into the world, we separate from our mothers, right? So memory is what keeps us connected. The reflective light of the moon always has been associated with memory. However, insofar as our remembering is only ever tied to what the yoga philosophers call our upadhis, our temporary material designations, our body, our state, our nation, our family, our political parties, the hashtags that we love, the Twitter handles that we grow famous by, all of the identity categories that we cling to, the size of our bank account, whatever the case might be. The more we cling to those things with our steely pinchers, then we are creatures that are shelling ourselves off from the world. And even though we might have a lot of sentimentality or emotional attachment to different groups, different things that we cling to, we ironically become hardened. We become shelled off by these attachments. And then we're made sort of crusty and saturnine. We're hardened like barnacles by the grip that the body and all the temporary things of this world have over the soul. And that's the kind of deep relationship that Cancer has with its opposite sign, Capricorn. Behind the silvery, beautiful light of the moon, there's a hard rock. And it's not to diss the moon, but that's also kind of an esoteric teaching. Behind the moon is Saturn. And behind Saturn is the moon. You can't separate them from one another in any fundamental sense. They exist in an interesting archetypal dynamic with one another. So in order to remember our source, the great ocean of love that we come from, we have to keep in touch with the fact that the descent into this material world also leads to forgetfulness. This is why, for example, in so many traditions, we repeat mantras. Why do we repeat mantras? Because we forget. And so we say things over and over. We say the names of God or the goddess over and over in circles, in rounds. Why? Because either the moon represents the places where you get attached, lost, entangled, and you forget, and then you become hardened and closed off, separated from the light, or it's a place where everything you see is filled with the silvery light of divinity, and it helps you remember divinity. And in order to help that process, we do things in cycles. We do things in circles. Yoga flows in circular breath. Meditation flows in circular breath. We repeat mantra in circular cycles, right? Like this. And the planets teach us this because they're always cycling, because the moon is always cycling, because the moon naturally goes from light to dark. We remember, sometimes we go into ignorance. And so I have to remember, I have to recite, I have to repeat. Practice, as Patanjali tells us in the Yoga Sutras, requires, great earnestness over a long period of time, regularly. That's what it takes to stay in remembrance. The second verse of the Yoga Sutras, Yoga Chitta Nirodha, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga is the cessation of the revolutions of the mind stuff. We become absorbed in remembrance, in devotional remembrance of divinity. Then even though the world keeps cycling around us, it cycles, but we stay centered. Right? These are teachings of the moon that are very deep. They don't always occur to us right away because we have all these stereotypes. Oh, if you're Cancer, you're in the kitchen or you're whatever. So another thing that's interesting is the Egyptians associated Cancer with the scarab beetle, who carries a ball of dung, of recycled materiality, to make its home with. In fact, new research has shown that certain species of dung beetles will literally stand on top of their little ball of poop and look up at the stars in the Milky Way in order to orient itself. And that's how they also help themselves push a ball in a straight line, because it's hard to push a ball in a straight line. So this is just an interesting fact about scarab beetles that is has a nice sort of metaphorical value for us as people interested in astrology. We are also born into recycled materiality. This world is essentially poop, right? In the sense of it's recycled content. Poop is good. You can grow things from poop. I'm not saying it's bad. However, it is poop, and it can be pretty stinky too, right? Right. So, we're born into a sphere of recycling stuff that's revolving and we're literally born on top of a ball of poop, intricate, beautiful, recycling organic material constantly. The best chance that we have to find our way back home as we descend down here is to remember to stand atop our sphere and to look up at the stars. Very fascinating that the scarab beetle is related with that. One of the words for scarab in the Egyptian language is something like kefir, Khprr. I'm not sure how to pronounce it exactly, but I've heard it said kefir, which is also loosely related to the word keeper. And it may indicate the idea of the scarab being a keeper of what it grabs onto. And similarly, crabs have long been associated with collecting, hoarding, and keeping things. What you bring into your crab hole, all sorts of stuff that you keep and find. Cancer, of course, sometimes psychologically relate to hoarding or keeping things, to clinging or possessiveness. Well, it's also fascinating to think that ancient mystics said that as much as we keep and hoard things, that actually spirit soul is kept, held, and clinged to by the body, which is not exactly under our control all the time. So, for example, the gods literally comprise our bodies in ancient astrology. Zeus is your liver, Kronos is your bones, etc. And in this sense, even though we're in a body, in many ways, the body is possessing us, is possessing the soul, is gripping, pinching the soul. So we are possessed by forces that we pretend to understand. That's something that Auden said, and James Hillman liked to quote. We're clutched and gripped by all of the things around us, and we have so much loyalty to those things, right? We have so much nostalgia and love and romance, and these are our stories, and some of it's beautiful, but remember that the original crab behind the story of Cancer, Karkinos, was a crab who grasped, pinched, and sort of bit the heel of Heracles, the hero. And in order to win that battle that Heracles was having, he had to crush with his heel the crab. After which Hera placed Karkinos in the stars for its service. That's really interesting because on the one hand, everything in this material world that we associate with, that we get identified with, and we think this is what's going to give me happiness, well, it ends up gripping us. It ends up possessing us, right? If we're not remembering our eternal divine nature somewhat regularly, if we're not sort of in remembrance somewhat regularly, then what we associate with grips, clings, grabs us, etc., and it ends up becoming something we have to smash. However, it should not be thought of as evil. The material world, all of the things that we associate with in this material world can't be thought of as evil. Why? Because what does Hera do with Karkinos afterwards? Puts it into the stars and says, thank you for your service. So our egos serve a purpose. Our bodies serve a purpose. The material world serves a purpose. It might be a ball of shit, but even shit serves a purpose. And we know that. If you're a gardener, you know that, right? So in some ways, there's nothing that we can't cling to, clutch, or possess. There's nothing that doesn't try to possess us that ultimately, if not mysteriously, is actually in service to our soul, in service to the soul and to its process of reaching back to the stars, reaching back to our home, to our source. If we have eyes to see it that way, if we have remembrance, if we've silvered, moon is related to the metal silver, if we've silvered our consciousness to see divinity in the world, then everything, all of our struggles, all of our battles, everything that tries to grip and hold us, all of the things that we get so possessed by, all of the different temporary material identifications that we get all obsessed with, even those things that we end up battling with at some point, even those things are servants. Very interesting. They're midwives of our spiritual process. The body, when seen in the best light, is a temple for the soul. right? But we have to reorient ourselves to see it that way. Now, of course, interestingly, beetles and crabs both live by the moon. Some beetles live 6 months underground and 6 months above in relation to the dark and light times of the year. They also give birth in accordance with the moon. Crabs live by the cycles of the moon and the tides. And we human beings are born through mothers whose bodily cycles closely resemble the waxing and waning of the moon. We call them moon cycles, a woman's moon. So as we right now are passing through the gateway of the summer solstice, the gateway of incarnation, it's a good time to remember our source. It's a good time to remember the heavenly script, to recite our mantras and to reconnect with our true identity, our soul. It's also a good time to take note of all that's gripping of us, of where we are overly needy, of where we've become possessed by unhealthy association, right? Of where we are literally rolling around in our own crap. You know what I mean? And can we loosen our grasp enough, or can we separate ourselves from that which grips us in order to remember the light of our soul? Now, there are eclipses coming next month, 2 of them. One in Cancer, a solar eclipse on July 2nd, and one on the 16th, a lunar eclipse in Capricorn. Now, the solar eclipse in Cancer on July 2nd points to a powerful moment of birthing. I'm going to be talking about this at length in a separate video. I'm just going to give you a sneak preview today. Solar eclipses are major moments of birth. And this is happening in the cosmic, watery, milky gateway of Cancer, right? So what kind of birth is it going to be? Is it something that's going to further entangle us? Is it something that's coming because of a deep neediness that we haven't found a way of addressing through our highest self? Or is it something that is going to help us reorient ourselves? Can we stand atop our lives, look up, find the stars, and birth something that will be a part of ferrying us home, homeward bound in our lifetime, real homeward bound? What do we use to create a feeling of at-homeness in the world? And is it real, or is it something that we're clinging to out of fear? In other words, is it real milk, real nourishment, or is it just another kind of artificial sweetener? These are questions that we have to ask. And the artificialness, the phoniness, and the things that grasp, grip, hold, lock us down in fear, those are secretly Saturnine things, right? So when the lunar eclipse of July 16th comes in the sign of Capricorn, Saturn, Saturn ruled, and with Capricorn and with Pluto and so forth, at that point, we have to ask, where is there an ending that needs to take place? Where is there a death? Where is there a letting go? Where is there a returning to the gods? Sometimes in life, the hardest things we have to do are the most necessary things. The things that we know are not fun, they're not easy, they require emotional sobriety. They require letting go of things that we're attached to, that we cling to, that are childish. We have to do the duty of being a soul who is on a journey that goes beyond so many of the things that we think are going to be everlasting and have some kind of ultimate relevance, but are just as passing as a Saturday, an afternoon soap opera. You know what I mean? So can we find the distant mystic Saturn, the one who says, don't forget that all of this is temporary? That Saturn is quiet. It's not a dark Saturn. It's not a foreboding Saturn. That Saturn is quiet and mature, like an old, wise grandmother or grandfather. This is the sage of many years. And this sage calls to us and says, make the mature choice. And even if it's difficult, you will sink just a little bit deeper into yourself. This body will become a little less demanding. Your mind will become a little less demanding if you do the thing that you know you have to do. If you do that thing that's just good old adult stuff, you know what I mean? So that's coming too, July 16th, my birthday this year. That should be interesting. I might have to do. What will I have to do? Well, I can tell you in advance that my wife and I just had to make the very difficult choice of closing our yoga studio. And of course, that was a sobering moment, because it's been something it's been a labor of love, and it's become somewhat unsustainable. And we've had it for a long time, almost a decade. And it's just a really, really tough decision. But yeah, deep inside, the quiet knowing when I look out at the sunset, you know, sitting on the porch, no noise, nothing to do. I know that's the right choice when I'm in that space. If I can put myself into a space of greater contemplation, of greater quiet, than the distant, dim truth that I love to not listen to starts singing. And it's quiet, but it's beautiful. That's Saturn. It's July 16th. That eclipse will ask us to grow, grow inward, grow far, far more outward, far beyond the boundaries and barriers of what we think we're capable of. It'll ask us to do so in quiet, meaningful, and mature ways. So that's coming as well. Now, these are vulnerable eclipses because birth and death is constant, but these two signs, Cancer and Capricorn, are the revolving doors of cosmic birth and death, the entrance of the soul into matter and the departure of the soul from the body. So these are delicate, vulnerable places for us, and they also involve hard structures and attachments. Barnacles and soft crab meat, you know what I mean? So the soft pink inside and hard, crusty, you know, outside. Those two things are in dynamic relationship with one another. And don't believe for a second that Cancer is only where the pink lives and that Saturn is only where the hard shell lives. There is a softness in Capricorn. That's why I'm getting to the soft, quiet wisdom, the gentle, quiet inner knowing that's sober but sweet in Capricorn, and why there's also a hardness and a clinging and an attachment that's actually pretty hard and dark in Cancer, as well as a sweetness. They're both there in both signs. So we can't forget that. All right, that's what I've got for you guys today. I hope that this was informative. As always, I hope that more than just knowing that this is what's coming, that this, just hearing this, right, just putting ourselves into the starry conversation should act like medicine for us. It reminds us that we're creatures of a great cosmos and that our hearts need to take refuge in that knowledge regularly. We can do it by just looking up at the stars. You don't have to listen to someone like me prattle on all the time, but just do it regularly. Okay. All right. That's what I've got for you guys. Have a good rest of your week. I'll probably get in touch in the next few days with something on the T-square between Venus and Jupiter and Neptune, which is also coming up very quickly. And that's a very interesting transit. So we'll talk about that soon. All right. Take care.